My son walked to the threshold of the study. He didn't knock. He simply turned to me and said, "This is a family matter, Mom. We'll tell you later." I stood there, frozen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. He just erased me, as if 45 years of marriage, 30 years of motherhood, and an entire life of sacrifice could dissolve in a single sentence. He didn't even say sorry. He closed the door softly, and in that quiet gesture, I understood. I was no longer invited into my own life. This isn't a story of shouting. It's not a drama with broken plates. It's something far more dangerous. It's what happens when your own child calmly decides that you no longer count. And you no longer have a say. My name is Elise Marchand. I'm 74 years old. And in this house, every wall, every floorboard, every creak in the wood still bears my name. I remember the day Robert pointed to me in front of his brother and said, "I'm going to build a life with her." And he did. Every stone in this home, every corner, every curtain sewn by hand. It was us. I wore a yellow dress the day we met. He used to say I looked like the sun. And even in the end, when his voice was only a whisper, he still called me Star. He'd say, "You still shine, even when everything else goes dark." We had only one child, Thomas. Our miracle. They told me I might never be able to have children. But he came. And from that first night in the hospital, I held him close. Like the whole world might try to steal him away. I was terrified. But I was ready to give him my entire life. And I did. Robert and I bet everything on him. When he wanted to study business, we mortgaged the house. When he launched his company, Robert pulled from his retirement fund. We never complained. We never asked him to pay it back. We said, "That's what parents do." And for a long time, we were proud. He came home for the holidays, brought us flowers for our birthdays. He said thank you. He said he loved us. But then something changed. At first, it was just the calls. They got shorter. Then came the silence between visits. Longer, quieter, more hollow. When he hugged me, it was polite. Efficient. That word. It started to follow him around like a shadow. Efficiency. In his emails. In his meetings. Even when he talked about family. I remember baking his favorite pie for his birthday. He took one bite and said, "You didn't have to go through all this trouble, Mom. You could have just ordered one." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. But it was a line. One I hadn't seen coming. And I crossed it anyway, hoping it would disappear. Mothers do that. We rationalize. We rewrite what we feel so it hurts less. He's just busy. He's under pressure. He still loves me. He just doesn't say it out loud anymore. But then, Robert got sick. And there was no more room to pretend. It was fast. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to hospice, 10 months. 10 months of waking up at 3 a.m. to wipe his forehead. 10 months of soft soups, blood tests, medicine cups. 10 months of trying to hold the pieces of us together like a bird with broken wings. And through it all, I stayed by his side. I was his hands, his strength, his voice. Thomas? He came when he could, but always with his laptop, always checking emails, always whispering in the hallway with Lena. Once, Robert was sitting at the kitchen table. It was one of those rare quiet afternoons. He looked so thin. I had to fight back the instinct to tuck a blanket around his shoulders. He reached for my hand and said, "Elise, there's something I need to tell you." I thought it was about pain or treatment. Maybe he wanted to prepare me for hospice. But he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I've changed the will." I blinked. Before I could say anything, he continued, "Thomas, he's different now. He doesn't look at you the way a son should look at his mother. I don't like what I'm hearing him and Lena whisper about." I tried to dismiss it, told him Thomas was just stressed, that he worried about us, that it came from love. But Robert shook his head. "No, he's positioning himself. When I'm gone, you have to be ready. You have to stand up." I nodded. But the truth is, I didn't understand. I didn't want to. Because what kind of mother believes her son would ever hurt her? After Robert passed, the house felt like it was holding its breath. His slippers stayed under the bed. His favorite mug, still on the drying rack. His cologne lingered in the hallway, like a memory that refused to leave. I slept on my side of the bed, not because I needed the space, but because moving into his emptiness felt like betrayal. Thomas came by more often after the funeral. He brought documents, spoke in timelines, used words like logistics, settling the estate, optimizing assets. I nodded through most of it, still numb, still figuring out how to exist in a world where Robert's laugh no longer echoed in the kitchen. One day, he told me we were having a meeting. The attorney's coming. Lena too. We'll go over everything and finalize some decisions. I made coffee, set out the good china, the ones with the little blue vines Robert liked. I thought, we'll sit around the table like a family. We'll figure it out together. But when the doorbell rang, Thomas didn't even let me open it. He met the attorney at the entrance, ushered Lena in, then turned to me, and stood in the doorway of Robert's study, like a wall. "This is between family, Mom," he said. His voice was business, cold, flat, not angry, just removed. I let out a little laugh, not because it was funny, but because I thought surely he was joking. But his face didn't change. He just added, "We'll let you know later." And then, he shut the door. Just like that. No invitation. No seat for me. I stood there in the hallway, surrounded by photos I had framed, holidays I had cooked for, birthdays I had planned. And I realized, I wasn't part of their definition of family anymore. That moment, it cracked something, a hairline fracture, in the illusion that love, or motherhood, would always be enough. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't ask to be let in. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, watched my hands tremble as I held the mug, and something inside me woke up. This wasn't grief. This wasn't loneliness. This was erasure. And I decided I was not going to disappear quietly. The next morning, I opened the drawer in Robert's old desk, the one he never let anyone organize but me, tucked beneath a faded folder of insurance forms. I found it. The brass key. It was small, dull around the edges, cold to the touch. 2 weeks before he died, Robert had pressed it into my palm and whispered, "Only after I'm gone, when you see who they really are." At the time, I hadn't understood. It sounded cryptic, like something from a movie. But now, Now it echoed with clarity. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. Just the sound of the old clock ticking above the sink. I held the key in my hand like it was a lifeline. And I heard his voice again. When you see who they really are. I was starting to. But I still had no idea what I was about to uncover. The next afternoon, Thomas stopped by like nothing had happened. He brought croissants in a brown paper bag from the bakery he thought I liked. He always forgot I preferred almond, not butter. Thought I'd treat you, Mom, he said, setting the bag down with a smile. We're getting close to wrapping things up with the estate. I nodded politely, poured us both coffee, but it wasn't until I caught the glance he exchanged with Lena, standing near the hallway, scrolling through her phone, that I felt it again. That shift. That wrongness. They weren't just finalizing paperwork. They were waiting for something. Later that day, I got in my car and drove to Valley Trust, a quiet little branch off Cedar Lane. Robert had told me where to go. He'd even written the box number on a sticky note and tucked it in my jewelry box. Box 209. The manager greeted me kindly. Your husband was very clear about his instructions, he said, as he led me into a small private room with cold walls and a metal table. Inside the safe deposit box, there were only 3 things. A manila envelope with my name on it, a small USB drive, and a leather folder labeled Power of Attorney and Financial Docs. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The first page was an updated will. Signed, notarized, witnessed, 6 months before he died. And on it, he had left everything to me. The house, the investments, the pension. There was a line for Thomas, but it was modest and conditional. Robert had seen the change. He'd seen the charm fade, and the calculation take its place. He had known, long before I did. I drove home in silence. Even the house felt colder, as if it too had been holding its breath. I didn't answer when Thomas called that night. Didn't mention what I had found. I just sat in the living room, staring at the brass key still on the table. And I understood. This was never just about grief. It was about a battle I didn't ask for, but was now ready to fight. Quietly, deliberately, completely. 2 days later, I had just finished folding laundry when the doorbell rang. It was a Thursday. Nothing special. But something in me tensed before I even got to the door. I opened it, and there they were. A man in a crisp blue blazer, and a woman holding a real estate clipboard. "Hi," she said brightly. "We're here for the showing. The agent said it was okay to come a little early." I blinked. Showing? She looked confused. The man turned his phone around, showing me a listing. "This house, 134 Oak Ridge Lane. It's listed online. Your son Thomas said." I didn't hear the rest. Their voices blurred. They were here to see my house. The one Robert and I built. The one where I still lived. And Thomas hadn't said a word. I smiled faintly, closed the door as gently as I could, and walked straight to the kitchen. I turned on the kettle, sat down, and listened. To the silence, to the quiet tick of the wall clock, to the storm building just under my ribs. He was selling the house. Not later. Not when I was ready. Now. Secretly. As if I didn't exist. There's a moment And if you're a mother, maybe you've felt it too. When you realize your child has stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a problem to manage. That was my moment. Not a slap. Not a scream. Just two strangers standing on my porch, ready to walk through the bones of my life. If you've ever felt like that, like a guest in your own home, like a burden to someone you raised and fed and fought for, you're not alone. That night, I plugged the USB into Robert's old laptop, the one he used in his study, still sitting on his desk like he might come back for it. The screen flickered, and there he was. Robert. Smaller, paler, but still him. His eyes were tired, but they still found the camera. And his voice, soft but steady, said, "If you're watching this, Elise, then you've seen the truth." Robert looked directly into the camera. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, "but I needed to be sure you'd have what you need." He began to explain how he had started noticing changes, money missing from their joint accounts, transactions they hadn't discussed. He overheard Thomas and Lena whispering in the hallway, talking about moving Mom and transferring assets before she starts forgetting things. They were preparing something final. And they weren't waiting for me to age. They were preparing me to vanish, on paper first, then in person. He found an old power of attorney form, one he'd signed 2 years prior, back when Thomas still smiled with sincerity, and realized it had been copied, used, forged, repurposed to open credit lines, move accounts, shift deeds. "They're not trying to help you," Robert said, his voice catching in his throat. "They're trying to remove you. Quietly. Because that's easier." I paused the video, sat there for what felt like forever, staring into the still frame of his face. I wasn't just grieving my husband anymore. I was grieving my son. I had spent so long defending Thomas, telling myself, and anyone who dared suggest otherwise, that he was just stressed, ambitious, driven. "He doesn't mean harm," I'd said. But sometimes, a mother sees what she wants to see, until she can't. Later that night, I searched the house listing online. There it was. Pictures of my living room, my bedroom, even the quilt I had stitched by hand, now framed in soft marketing light, and under owner. Not Debbie, not Robert, just Thomas Reynolds. I wasn't even a name anymore, just a shadow in someone else's transaction. I closed the laptop, opened the bottom drawer of Robert's desk, the one with our old expense notebook, his handwriting still neat and deliberate, lining the pages, and tucked between 2 sections. A note, in pencil. "Sunshine," it read. "If they forget who you are, remind them." I stared at it for a long time, then looked around the room. At the curtains I'd sewn in 1983. At the chair where Robert used to read. At the garden we had planted every spring. They had tried to erase me, but I was still here. And I was no longer afraid to be seen. They say grief comes in waves. But betrayal doesn't. Betrayal isn't a tide. It's a trapdoor. One moment you're standing, on family, on love, on decades of devotion. And the next, the ground gives out. No sound, no warning, just the cold sensation of falling. After I saw my home listed online, while I was still living in it, I moved differently, not because I was afraid, but because I was awake. I started watching, listening, Lena stopped calling me Mom. She hadn't done that since the wedding. Thomas stopped asking how I was feeling. He started talking in numbers. Property taxes are rising. It's more efficient if you move to a single story. It's not sustainable for you to stay here alone. Every sentence came with a smile. Every smile came with a message. And every message whispered the same thing. You're not supposed to stay. I checked the mailbox twice a day now. Not because I expected anything kind, but because I feared what would arrive next. And 3 days later, it came. A letter from a loan office I didn't recognize. A non-payment notice on a personal line of credit. In my name. I stood in the hallway, letter shaking in my hand. Then walked straight to the drawer. Pulled out the brown leather folder from the safe deposit box. And began comparing signatures. They were close. Very close. But they weren't mine. They had used my name. Opened accounts. Filed for a home equity line of credit against the very house they were trying to sell. The roof over my head was now their collateral. You spend your whole life being dependable. You say yes more than no. You stay up late. You show up early. You make birthday cakes from scratch and sacrifices you never mention. Also that, in the end, your child can feel safe enough to return to you. But what happens when you find out they've forged your name to erase your place? I didn't confront them. Not yet. I walked to the kitchen, made a cup of tea. Same cup, same kettle, same silence. Except this time, I didn't sit in the dining room. I sat in Robert's old chair in the study, turned on the brass lamp, opened the notebook again, and found a name I hadn't noticed before. Granger, Walter. Attorney. Trust him. So I did. When I called, he didn't sound surprised. He just asked one thing. Have you seen the video? Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment, then said, James was thorough. He loved you deeply. He wanted to make sure you'd have every tool you needed. The next morning, I got dressed with purpose. For the first time in weeks. I put on lipstick. Not red, just a soft rose. The kind Robert used to say made me look awake. I wore the blue wool coat he bought me for our 30th anniversary. The one he said made my eyes look like the sea. And I walked straighter. Because I knew where I was going. And why. Walter Granger's office was tucked between a florist and a pharmacy. Nothing grand. Just clean lines and warm wood. He welcomed me like he'd known me his whole life. No pity. No patronizing. Just respect. He slid a folder across the desk. Navy blue. Thick. James left this for you. Inside were all the things I hadn't known I'd need. A certified copy of the updated will. A notarized neurological assessment. Proof that James had been of sound mind when he signed it. And a log. Page after page. In Robert's handwriting. Every transaction he found suspicious over the past 18 months. Every note. Every flag. I flipped through it slowly. There. A wire transfer of $20,000 from their joint account, made while Robert was in the ICU. There. A printed email from Thomas to a financial planner. Once she's moved, we can consolidate the assets more efficiently. And then, the photos. Thomas and Lena, sitting across from a woman I didn't recognize. Laughing. Another. Them walking through the grounds of a senior living facility. Touring units. Smiling politely. taking notes. They were picking a place to put me. Not with me. Not after asking. For me. As if I were a box to relocate. An expense to minimize. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring out at the garden Robert and I had planted together. I couldn't cry anymore. Not out of rage. Not out of grief. What I felt was something colder. Something deeper. I wasn't being argued with. I wasn't being screamed at. I was being edited out. Like the last page of a book someone didn't want to finish reading. I looked around at everything I had touched, built, preserved. The lace curtains I'd sewn in the 80s. The rocking chair where Robert read aloud on rainy days. The tulips we planted by the fence line. His favorite colors, red and gold. None of it meant anything to Thomas anymore. To him, it was just leverage. A way out of debt. A fresh start. Without me. And that is something only women like us truly understand. It's not the yelling that breaks you. It's the soft, smiling decisions made behind your back. The ones that never say your name. Because they've already decided you no longer count. The next morning, I checked the mailbox again. There it was. Another envelope. Thick. Unfamiliar. Inside, a notice of intent to transfer title. Thomas wasn't just listing the house. He was about to finalize it. And he had no idea that I had everything. The updated will. The medical evaluations. The video. The forged documents. And most importantly, my name. Still valid. Still powerful. Still mine. I closed the mailbox and walked back toward the front door. And for the first time in weeks, my shoulders settled. Let them think I'm confused. Let them think I'm old. Slow. Forgetful. Let them believe I'll sit in silence while they decide what happens to my life. Let them believe that, because soon, they'd find out who I really was. That afternoon, I gathered it all. The video, the forged loan documents, the emails, the photographs, the attorney's folder. I placed them carefully into a navy blue file, with brass corners. No labels. Just wait. Then I picked up the phone and called Thomas. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice was cheerful, almost performative. "I was just about to call you." I kept my voice even. "I think we should have a proper meeting. About everything." There was a pause. Then he said, "That's a good idea. Lena and I were thinking the same. Maybe sit down with the advisor this weekend." I nodded to no one. "Sunday works for me." We agreed on a time. They thought they were setting the agenda, that they were leading the discussion, that they were walking into a tidy little victory lap. They didn't know that I had already spoken to Walter. They didn't know that the will was already filed in probate, that the forged documents had been reviewed, that the trust had already been protected. And they certainly didn't know that I had already decided. The hallway outside Robert's study, the same one where my son once said, "This is between family, Mom." I stood there again and whispered into the quiet air, "It still is, Thomas, but not in the way you think." That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I felt victorious, not because the pain was gone, but because I could finally see it clearly. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been erased, step by step. smile by smile, document by document. But I still had the pen. And I was ready to write myself back in. The sky was overcast that Sunday morning. The kind of gray that settles over everything without asking permission. I ironed my navy blouse, the one with the pearl buttons Robert always liked, brushed my hair, put on soft pink lipstick, packed the navy folder into my tote. No drama, no anger, just preparation. Thomas and Lena arrived 5 minutes late, as usual. They breezed in with takeaway coffee cups, smiling like this was just another quick meeting to tick off their list. "Mom, this won't take long," Thomas said, patting my shoulder like I was a neighbor who'd locked herself out. "We've already mapped out a plan," Lena added. "We just want to make sure you feel included." Included. After everything, they led me to the dining room. The same one where Robert used to slice the roast on Sundays. Where we had lit candles on every birthday. Now, it was covered in documents. Color-coded tabs. Budget projections. Bullet points and highlighted texts. Thomas cleared his throat like a man giving a presentation. "We think it's time to simplify your lifestyle," he said. "The house is big. The market's hot. We've already arranged a showing for next week." He slid a sheet of paper toward me. "We've pre-qualified you for a beautiful assisted living unit. Private balcony. Garden access. You'll love it." I looked at the paper. They weren't asking. They were deciding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even frown. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and slowly pulled out my folder. No sudden movements. Just quiet certainty. I laid it gently on top of theirs. "What's that?" Thomas asked. His smile wavered. "Something you forgot to include in your plan," I said. I opened the folder and pulled out a certified copy of Robert's will. Slid it across the table. He frowned. "We've already reviewed the estate paperwork." "No," I said calmly. "You reviewed the version you thought was final. This is the updated will. The real one. Signed 6 months before your father passed." Lena leaned over, reading fast. I watched the color drain from her face. "Everything to you," she whispered. I nodded. "Everything." The silence that followed was loud. Then Thomas laughed. A short, nervous sound. "That can't be real. Dad would have told me." "He did tell someone," I said. "Me." Lena snatched the paper. "We'll contest this." "You can try," I said, still calm. "But I have the attorney's statement. The medical evaluations proving Robert was of sound mind. And more." I reached again, pulled out the forged loan applications, slid them across the table. "Recognize these?" Thomas paled. "That's Mom's signature. We signed those together during Dad's illness. You don't remember?" I met his eyes. "I remember everything. And so does the bank." Their panic didn't bring me joy, but it brought something else. Clarity. They hadn't planned to betray me in one violent act. They had planned to remove me. Softly. Quietly. Step by step. And the worst part? They didn't just underestimate me. They forgot who raised them. Shall I continue with Chapter 11, The Garden? Thomas's voice turned cold. "You think you can handle all this alone? You're 74, Mom." I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. "I'm not alone," I said softly. "I have a lawyer. A plan. And peace of mind. And that's something you can't take from me. Lena snapped. You can't keep that house forever. I met her gaze. Maybe not. But if I leave it one day, it'll be because I decided, not because someone tried to make me disappear. They left not long after. Thomas, quiet. Lena, angry. No dramatic exit. No slamming doors. Just space. Just distance. And somehow, that felt heavier than shouting. That night, I sat on the back porch, with a cup of tea in my hands, and the garden stretching out before me. The tulips Robert and I planted along the fence were starting to bloom again, red and gold, his favorite colors. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just let the wind move through me, and I breathed. The following week, I changed the locks, transferred the utilities back into my name. I met with Walter again and finalized everything. Quietly, deliberately. Then I began shredding old papers, cleaning out closets. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted space. Not just in the house, but in me. I took down the hallway photos of Thomas. Not out of anger, but to make room. I kept one. A picture from his 5th birthday. Chocolate cake on his cheeks. Laughing at something Robert had said behind the camera. I placed it in a drawer. Not as a memorial, but as a reminder. People change. And sometimes, they come back. But if they do, they'll have to meet me where I am now. I started going to the community center on Tuesdays. Joined a watercolor class. I'd forgotten how much I loved to paint. The sound of the brush. The way the color pools when you stop overthinking. I took long morning walks. Learned to cook for one. Sat in silence without feeling alone. This wasn't revenge. And it wasn't victory. It was something softer. Quieter. More sacred. It was mine. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found an envelope. Thomas's handwriting on the front. Inside, a simple card. No apology. No explanation. Just one line. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. I stood there on the porch, card in hand, then folded it, tucked it into my journal, and whispered, maybe, but not on your terms. 6 months. That's how long it had been. Since the Sunday morning I quietly took my life back. The house felt different now. Not haunted. Not heavy. Just mine. I hadn't made any grand changes. Just small ones. I moved the dining table closer to the window, where the morning light poured in. Turned the guest bedroom, once reserved for Thomas and Lena, into a sewing and reading space. Full of fabric swatches, half-read novels, quiet music in the background. The study, Robert's old refuge, had become something else entirely. A writing room. A place where my hands remembered what they'd once forgotten. That they weren't only made to serve others. They could create too. The biggest change, though? The silence. It no longer felt like absence. It felt like peace. I still kept Robert's photo on the nightstand. The one of him in his favorite brown flannel. The one he refused to throw out no matter how many times I patched the elbows. Some nights, I'd talk to him. Just small things. The tulips came early this year. I fixed the gate myself today. You'd be proud. He never answered. But somehow, I always felt heard. Thomas hadn't called since the letter. No visits. No voicemails. Just that single handwritten line, folded neatly between past and maybe. I hadn't responded. Not out of anger. Not as punishment. But because I needed space to heal. Without being dragged back into his timeline. And I was finally learning that mine mattered too. One Sunday morning, Robert, not my husband but his oldest friend, stopped by. He brought croissants. Didn't ask too many questions. Didn't press when I didn't answer. Just showed up. "You've made this place feel new again," he said, setting the pastries on the counter. I smiled. "It still creaks in all the same places." He nodded, looked out at the garden. "James would be proud of you." I felt my throat tighten. Didn't speak. Just nodded back. That spring, I planted tomatoes. Built the raised beds myself. Robert helped me paint the edges robin's egg blue. A color James always said reminded him of summer skies. Neighbors started stopping by, asking what I was growing. I gave them herbs. And sometimes, when I was feeling generous, a few quiet truths. Not everyone needed to know what had happened. Not everyone deserved the whole story. Because this wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about returning to myself on my own terms. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. I knew the number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Hi, Mom." Thomas's voice. Smaller, less sure. I waited. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I've started therapy. Lena and I are separated now. Silence. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. I've been thinking. I didn't rush to fill the space. Then I said, "I'm glad you're getting help." His voice cracked. "Would it be okay if I called again sometime?" I paused. Then said, "Yes. But not to talk about the past. Only the present. If you want to know me, you start here." He agreed. Quietly. And we hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just stood by the kitchen sink and watched the wind move through the trees. Then whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "It's never too late, but it has to be real." Weeks passed. We spoke occasionally. Simple calls. Awkward, but honest. He didn't ask for money. He didn't mention the house. And that, more than anything, made me believe something had changed. One evening, I sat down at my desk, Robert's old writing desk, and opened the document I had been quietly working on. A memoir. Not for publishing. Just for me. And maybe one day, for someone else who needed to hear it. I titled it, The Quiet Room, because that's where they left me once. And that's where I rose from. If you've ever felt like someone tried to erase you, your voice, your work, your place in this world, just remember, you're still here. You still matter. And your story isn't finished. If this story reminded you of someone, or something you've lived through, you can share it in the comments. Or just write 3 words. I'm still here. Because sometimes, just saying that out loud, is a kind of healing.